Welcome to our Theological Institute. During these days, we're trying to answer a few questions. One of those questions is, who wrote the Bible? And presuming that different people wrote different books in the Bible, who decided which books got into the Bible and which books didn't get into the Bible? So if we think back a week ago, what we talked about last week was who wrote the various books of the Christian Scriptures. We know that the Scriptures tend to be divided into two halves. What we traditionally refer to as the Old Testament or the New Testament. The Old Testament we refer to as the Hebrew Scriptures, simply because it's a more inclusive term, rather than suggesting to our Jewish sisters and brothers that their scriptures are old and ours are somehow better because they're new. The New Testament we often refer to as the Christian Scriptures. Last week we focused on the Christian Scriptures. Who wrote every one of the books of the New Testament? Who wrote those various books? Do we know? We concluded that we know that Paul wrote several of those letters, several of the books that are contained in the Bible. Many of the others are pseudonymous works, simply meaning that even though there's a name attached to it, we don't know that it was really a person by that name who wrote that book. Just because it says the letter of Peter or the letter of James, does that mean that a person named Peter or a person named James wrote that? It's more often the case that a person wrote those in the name and in the spirit of another person. It's almost like speech writers or others today who write things in other people's names. It would be a similar thing. So tonight the question becomes, having all of these books, and next week we're going to come back to the Hebrew Scriptures. We're sort of like going to start here with this hinge moment of the Christian Scriptures. And decide now, well, who determined which books go into the Bible? How do we move toward what we refer to as the canon of Scriptures? Perhaps you've heard that word before. Canon law is the church law. A canon comes from a Greek word literally meaning a reed or something that's used to measure. So we measure ourselves, we measure these books, and we determine which books go in, which books make the cut, which books stay out of the Bible. So moving toward the established canon is what we call this first section. Think about it for a moment. We said that during the first 3 centuries of the church we were persecuted. So long as we were persecuted, were we printing Bibles? No. We were interested in survival. Follow me? When you're persecuted, you're not interested in printing Bibles and having bookstores that sell Bibles and religious artifacts. No, you're interested in surviving to the next day. And then what happened is after 3 centuries of being persecuted, before Constantine, we understand that we were persecuted. Even our books were burned because we were seen as this heretical offshoot of Judaism. So long as we were Jews, we were protected from persecution. So long as the Jews said they're no longer part of us, then we were persecuted. They pushed us out of their synagogues. We were persecuted, killed. At that time, before we had a Bible, it's important to understand that different people accepted and or rejected different books of the Bible. So what we had was we had different local communities. We had a community in Austin, we had a community in Lockhart, we had a community in Niederwald, we had communities in different places, and the local community decided which letters of Paul and which works they were going to read. So maybe one community would be doing something different from other communities. Some books were widely accepted by various communities, as expressed by the Muratorian canon, by Irenaeus of Lyon, by Tertullian, by Origen. What are all these names? If we were to look ahead toward page 2, we're about to see that what happens is we have a guide here to those books that were commonly accepted in blue. If a book is accepted in blue, so all the ones that are largely blue made it into the Bible. The ones that were commonly accepted. There were a lot of books then that were commonly accepted, like the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you can see many of them were commonly accepted. Oh, interesting. Marcion, if you look at the first column, Marcion accepted Luke. Marcion rejected Matthew, Mark, and John for whatever reasons. How interesting. So his Bible didn't have Matthew, Mark, and John. It did have Luke. See that chart?
Who was Marcion?
Who was Marcion? Marcion was an early church leader.
Okay.
And so what we have is we have these different early church leaders determining what we're going to read here. And Marcion was one who said, no, we are not reading anything except Luke. Luke is our story. Going back to page 1, things changed then when Constantine became the emperor. Because when Constantine became the emperor, he had this idea, ooh, look at all these different people of so many different religions. It's hard to lead an empire that's so divided. What if they were all to be the same religion? Oh, I think I'm onto something now. So, as a political move, Constantine had to decide which religion was going to be the state religion, the religion of the empire, the imperial religion. And, fortunately for us, what did he choose? Did he choose the cult of the sun god? No, he chose Christianity. And with that, the entire future of Christianity changes. Because now, no longer are we not only not persecuted, but now, not only do we step out of the shadows, but we are now the official religion of the empire. Talk about going from day to night.
His mother had a lot of influence on him.
His mother had some influence. So the
According
story
to
is
the
told.
guides.
There you go. So the question becomes, how do we separate the story from what really took place? According to the story, we know that he was very much influenced by his mother. According to the story, he had this dream, this vision, where Christ came in, and essentially it was Christ who inspired him to choose Christianity for the empire. That is a tremendous origin story, a tremendous story of how to explain where it came from. Oh, I didn't decide. God showed me which religion we should have. Oh, very cool. So, letter B, what's important for us to understand is that the early church that used to gather at sunrise and to break bread together, now is going to resemble something very different, because now that the church is part of the empire, and it's part of the imperial structure, the hierarchy, the church is going to come to reflect the society. Which is why, for instance, we used to have big halls that we used to meet in that are essentially what our churches are today. The way that we started dressing during Mass, like with all these robes and everything, we were just modeling things that we saw in other parts of the society. And so often when you're meeting with other independent Catholic clergy, they'll use terms like when Christianity became the imperial religion. What are they talking about? How different it was, you know, from the early church, where all these communities were very independent, to now all of a sudden Constantine saying, no, we're all going to do the same thing. No, we're all going to believe the same thing. No, we're all going to have the same Bible. Marcion, you can't just have the Gospel of Luke, we're going to have the same Bible. Do you see where we're going here and how this fits with especially our tradition as independent Catholics? The Roman Catholic Church tends to be the one that is more structured and fitting with the empire. Everyone's going to do the same. Uniformity, uniformity, uniformity. Independent Catholicism, actually we tend to look more back to the ancient church and see how it was that every community was different and celebrated in different ways and was unique. Number 4, if we're going to unite the empire under a single religion, then we need a few things. We need a creed. What do we believe? Let's come up with that together, which is where we're going to come up with the Nicene Creed. Have you heard of the Nicene Creed before? We say it every Sunday. What's the Nicene Creed? I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Where did we come up with that? That was right here. When we got the empire together and we said, okay, Constantine said, I'm going to pay for all the bishops to come, bring them all together so that we can be able to talk about what do we believe in our empire. What books are going to be in the Bible? Okay, y'all figure it out. So that everyone has the same Bible. We're going to have uniformity throughout this empire. We're going to have the same religion throughout the empire. We're not going to have any squabbles in this empire. So the Council of Nicaea, met in 325, was Constantine's attempt to bring together the bishops to settle disputes. At that time, some of the disputes had to do with Christ's divinity. They were arguing about who Christ was. The nature of the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, they're arguing about that. The date of Easter, they were arguing about that and celebrating that on different days. Constantine said, no, we're going to decide all of this. The other thing that we're going to decide then is the Canon of Scriptures. What goes in the Bible? What doesn't? Some of the people who were instrumental in determining the Canon of Scriptures, what goes into the Bible that we have today, were Eusebius of Caesarea. We've heard of Caesarea before on the map. Caesarea is the city that's on the shore. Because it's on the shore, it's the one that's closest to Rome, so it was essentially the Roman capital here in Palestine. So Eusebius then was the bishop of Caesarea in the early 4th century. He was the bishop of Caesarea at the time of the Edict of Toleration. 313 is when we were allowed to come out of the shadows. He wrote various books, including a history of the church, a life of Constantine, a book called The Preparation for the Gospel, which showed how it is that we as Jews and Scripture and Christians have better stories than the pagan myths. Ours are more true. And then to standardize practice, Constantine asked Eusebius to produce 50 compilations of scriptures for church use. I'd like for you to, I'll give you the scribes that you need to copy these books, but I want 50 of the same books to be used throughout the empire. Think about that task. So the question for Eusebius becomes, what goes into the book and what stays out of the book? Follow me? Because whatever Eusebius creates is essentially going to be the first Bible in the empire. We're going to have 50 of the same book. You decide what that book is. That brings us to letter D. To accomplish this, Eusebius divided works into 3 buckets. Okay, what are we going to decide goes in or out? He divided them into 3 buckets then. First bucket, things that are universally accepted. Remember all those things in blue on page 2? We'll call those, everyone accepts these. We'll put those in the first bucket. Those go in. So far so good? We'll call those the universally accepted books of the Bible. There's not a lot of disagreement over these. Okay, Marcion, we know Marcion is a little upset about including Matthew, Mark, and John, but he'll have to get over it. The rest of us, we can largely agree that these books go in the Bible. That's bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 becomes a little more problematic. This is where we put all the disputed or problematic texts, things like James and Jude and the second letter of Peter, 2 John, 3rd John, Hebrews, Revelation. Yeah, we can't all agree on these in the same way that we could with these. With these, we can all agree, put it into the Bible. Here, we start having some challenges. We start getting into conversations. Bucket number 3 were those books that Eusebius rejected that are still around, but we know that he wrote them off. Things like the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Matthias, the Acts of Andrew, the Acts of Paul, the Acts of John, Shepherd of Hermas, letter of Barnabas, the Didache, 1st and 2nd letters of Clement, the Apocalypse of Peter. Eusebius read those works, and he decided himself, yeah, not even going to bring those up. Those go on the shelf. But we have a record of him saying no to those. 3 buckets then: yes, maybe, and no. So far so good? What was great about it was that his selections were endorsed by Constantine, which is why it's important for us to take a look at page 2, where it shows one of those columns, the second last one says Eusebius. Eusebius's Bible, the first Bible in the empire then, had those books in blue. So wait a minute, what does that mean for all the other books that later were to become in blue under Athanasius? What happened there? We'll pause there to see if there are any questions on Eusebius before we continue on to Athanasius and see how he added other books in the Bible. So Eusebius' Bible looked different from our Bible today. It was a lot shorter. Okay, going on to Athanasius of Alexandria. Athanasius lived at the turn of the 4th century, so at the beginning of the 300s. He lived throughout the 4th century, died near the end of the 4th century. He was the bishop of Alexandria. Do you remember when we talk about Alexandria? Why is Alexandria important? It's one of the 5 principal places, one of the 5 principal cities in the church. When we pray for the patriarchs, the first 5 patriarchs of the church were in the 5 most important cities. At that time, they were Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Rome, capital of the empire, and Constantinople, which would become the capital of the empire. Alexandria, then, where he was the bishop, was one of the of the 5 most important cities of Christianity. And so, Athanasius, being in that important city as a bishop now, he decided that he was going to be a staunch defender of everything that was agreed to at Nicaea. No, Mario, you cannot deviate from what we agreed to. When we were together at Nicaea, we said, this is what we're going to believe, and this is what we're going to believe. Understood? He became the staunch defender of what they had agreed to. And interestingly, we have the story that his rigidity, because he was such a rigid guy, he was exiled 5 times from the place where he was a bishop. Could you imagine not being able to get along with someone so much, or being that person yourself, where they're just like, buddy, you gotta go. You are so irritating us right now. And so he would go away into exile, and then he'd come back, irritate them some more, go away. I mean, 5 times they exiled him. And after being exiled, sent away 5 times, when he came back at age 72, after his 5th exile, he wrote an Easter letter to his clergy there in Alexandria, telling them which books should be included in their scriptures. And it was his list of books that would later become definitive. He included the texts in Eusebius's first 2 buckets, right? Eusebius ruled out the 3rd bucket. We're not going to touch those. But buckets number 1 and 2 go into the scriptures that you can proclaim. You can use any of those scriptures in buckets 1 and 2. He's also the one who coined this term, canon, for that group of all those that are included in the Bible. What books are included in the Bible? It's the canon. 1 N, not 2. If it's spelled with 2 N's, it's a different type of canon. Launches things out. This type of canon of 1 N is that list of the books in the Bible. He's the one who coined that term. He also coined the term to canonize, which means to give official sanction to something. What does it mean to canonize a saint? To make that saint official. This saint is officially on our list. And so, we came up with 27 books in the Christian scriptures, in the New Testament. And it was Athanasius, this rigid bishop, who said, in these alone is proclaimed the doctrine of godliness. Let no one add or take anything from them. Don't touch my list of books. And how many books do we have today? 27. We haven't touched that list. We haven't changed that list since Athanasius in the 4th century. Fascinating that his list became our Bible. His list, which ultimately came from those first 2 buckets of Eusebius. Eusebius separated things into 3 buckets. Don't use these. We can talk about these. These are okay. He just took all those. His 27 books in his Easter letter became our New Testament.
How do you manage to swing that?
How do you manage to swing that? That is an excellent question, especially knowing how rigid this man was and how much people must have,
And how much
he must have grated on them for him to have been sent away into exile.
exiled him 5 times.
No,
So he'd be distracted by the friend on the carpet back there.
the friend.
That leads us up to page 2 then of our notes. Page 2 then gives us a graph of the different books in the Bible. Gives an idea then of what was commonly accepted, those above, and then what Athanasius both added to the Bible, but also the ones that he decided not to. Do you see the ones in green that he did not mention? Those didn't make the cut.
Did not mention
Any questions or comments on this chart? As we look at this chart of various books, we see the key on the side of those that were accepted. Those that were accepted, but others, some accepted them, but others disputed them. Some that were disputed, rejected, etc.
So he's,
So it happened in order. These people rejected or accepted.
Did they happen in order?
Yeah, was as Athanasia, was that the last word?
Excellent question. He was definitely the last in this list, and Eusebius was second last. The others we might think of as more simultaneous. That is to say, it's sort of like different communities and different people were deciding what was acceptable to them, which is why, for instance, Marcion came up with a different list from others. But what we see is other people are, as people start talking, as Becky starts talking with Terry over in her community, hey, what scriptures are y'all using? Hey, these are scriptures you're using. Oh, yeah, we should add that to ours. Ooh, yeah, maybe you're right about that one. Maybe we shouldn't use that one. There's starting to become this agreement on what books we might use. And that's how we started coming up with these three baskets, essentially. The one basket where people just agree. People agree, so, okay, let's just use these. Eusebius kept the middle basket out. Athanasius said, yeah, I understand there's a dispute over them, but at the same time, put them in, let people use them.
Yeah.
What do you-
I'm surprised that he didn't accept the wisdom of Solomon.
The wisdom of Solomon. So it's interesting to see what books that they even knew of. So in green, for instance, did not mention. It's probably the case that he wasn't aware of that, or
Oh, he didn't mention,
He
he
did
wasn't
mention
mentioned then. Huh.
that was mentioned by the Muratonian canon. So someone mentions this old book and says, yeah, that's part of our Bible. The wisdom of Solomon is part of our Bible.
Yes, one of them, yeah.
Which is why when we come next week to the Hebrew scriptures, there'll be a whole other conversation. Okay, these 2 weeks we're focusing on who wrote the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, and who decided which ones go in.
Well,
This is going to be a whole other conversation then, with other books like the Wisdom of Solomon, Song of Songs, other works by Solomon. Okay, who decides about those? We're going to use this as a hinge moment to go forward with the Christian scriptures. Page 8, Athanasius' canon then was confirmed in Hippo, which is in northern Africa. That's a city. St. Augustine came from there. So maybe you've heard of St. Augustine of Hippo. St. Augustine. So in Hippo, they approved Athanasius' canon. So how interesting. His list, his canon, is now becoming approved by different groups. They meet in Hippo and say, okay, we approve using Athanasius' list. They meet in Carthage in 397. Yep, we approve using Athanasius' list. The Bishop of Rome approved his list in 405. Why is the Bishop of Rome important? Because of those 5 centers of Rome, Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, and what would later be Constantinople, Rome was always considered the primus inter pares, the first among equals. So even though they were all equals, they didn't have a hierarchy back then. They didn't have a pyramid structure. We're all equals. We agree on that. But someone has to chair our meeting. Who's going to be the chairperson today? The Bishop of Rome. Bishop of Rome approves Athanasius' list for our use. But even though these were approved in 405, the debate continued, especially regarding James, Jude, and Hebrews. Ooh, the letter to the Hebrews, have you heard of that before? The letter of James. Have you heard of the letter of James before? On Sunday, there was a debate. Even after we agreed on all of these, there's a debate. Should we really include James? Becky's suggesting maybe we shouldn't. I mean, it's some challenging words. Showing no partiality.
Oh,
Be doers of the word and not hearers only. This is like a challenging, let's nix this book. There's a debate until 419 when the Council of Carthage reaffirmed, no, let's just keep it in. Those who want to read it can read it. But lest we should think of the Greek scriptures. These were written principally in Hebrew, with some in Aramaic and some in Greek. So I refer to them as they were written for the Hebrews, the Hebrew-speaking persons, the Israelites. These are the Greek-speaking scriptures. So we had all sorts of debates about translating scriptures. Anyone in the room read Greek? Okay. We have a problem. If no one reads Greek, obviously we need to start translating it. The challenge of translating that, this is where it gets good because people are going to lose their lives. The church is going to kill people over their translations of the Bible. I couldn't make this up. The Bible, we understand, was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, so we needed a skilled and thick-skinned translator. I say thick-skinned because skilled, obviously, you need someone who knows those languages and who can start to translate from Greek into another language like, well, we're in the Roman Empire, what about Latin? Oh, good idea. Let's translate everything into Latin. So we need someone who knows Greek, and we need someone who knows Latin. Why thick-skinned? Because the moment someone translates that, what's going to happen is everyone else is going to have their own opinions. Well, why did you translate this word this way? Why did you say it this way? You're going to need a thick-skinned person. We found that person in a man named Eusebius. Ooh, have you heard that name before? Eusebius of Caesarea. Oh, there's another Eusebius. His last name was Euronymous. Today we know him as St. Jerome. Have you heard of St. Jerome? So St. Jerome, who lived from roughly 340 to 420, was raised by wealthy parents, trained in Latin and Greek. He built him his own library by copying books, and he was old enough to remember that before we had all sorts of fancy computers and copy machines, what did we do? You wanted to remember something, you took out a notepad and a pencil, and you copied it down. Jerome did that. Jerome built a library of books that he copied. After 3 or 4 years as a monk in Nicaea, Italy, he had a dream of God judging him and saying, "You are a Ciceronian, not a Christian." That made him change his life. Have you ever had like a dream that you wake up and you're like, "Oh, that was an odd dream"? He woke up and his dream was God pointing at him and saying, "You are not a Christian, you're a Ciceronian. You worship Cicero over Christ." Yikes. So he decided to change his life and become a Christian.
Well, if God says so, yeah.
When God points at you and says, "You're going to hell over this." So he fled to the wilderness southeast of Antioch. And then in the middle of the wilderness, he found a cave where he wore sackcloth, burlap, and where he prayed. And as he prayed, he would open up his Bible and he would notice, knowing Latin and Greek, he would open up his Bible and he'd be like, "I wonder why they translated it like that. This is such a clumsy, wooden, stilted translation. I could do so much better than this." So what are you guessing he's going to do? Repelled by the clumsiness of scriptures and the confusing inaccuracies of translations, like why didn't they translate it that way? Jerome traveled to Rome, where he was appointed secretary to the Bishop of Rome, Damasus at that time. Today we refer to him as Pope, but back at that time we didn't call them popes per se, they were the Bishop of Rome. He went to Pope Damasus, was appointed his secretary, and was commissioned to produce a new Latin Bible. Okay, you don't like the Bible? I'll let you create the Bible. What do you need for you to be able to translate the Bible for us from Greek into Latin? Jerome's goal, he said, was to correct the mistakes by inaccurate translators and the blundering alterations of confident but ignorant critics, and further all that has been inserted or changed by copyists more asleep than awake. Ooh, I like that. Think about that line for a moment, because how did we do books back then? We had to copy them by hand. But what happens when human beings start doing things and they get tired or silly or drunk or whatever, right? Suddenly what you're copying doesn't look the same. Which is one of the challenges of scripture scholars, because when we talk about these books of the Bible now, right now we have definitive text in the Bible, but before then we had all sorts of different copies. We had to try to figure out, okay, what is the original copy of all of these? Like, what is the most original of all the copies that we have?
It's all lost in translation.
A lot of it's trying to figure out, how do we find the book that we are then going to translate into our language? Jerome translated the New Testament in 1 year. 1 year? Shoot, he was flying. Comparing Latin versions to Greek texts. Damasus died, the Bishop of Rome, Pope Damasus, And Jerome traveled to Bethlehem, back into the Holy Land, where he looked for other patrons, other people who would support him while he did his work of translating the Bible. So Jerome began translating the Hebrew scriptures. He learned the Jewish oral tradition. And he admitted that he added to ancient texts. That is, say, okay, I have a Hebrew word. I don't know how to translate it. I'm just going to go with this word, or this translation, this phrase. He admitted that he wasn't able to translate everything accurately. Jerome judged various books to be the crazy wanderings of a person whose senses have taken leave of him or her, so he didn't translate those books. Some books, it's just like, I don't know what they were smoking, but I'm not wasting my time translating that book. He labeled those books the Apocrypha. Have you heard of that expression before, the Apocrypha? So that there are different books, for instance, that didn't make it into Protestant Bibles. Oh, those are the ones that Jerome said. No, don't know what they were smoking, but I'm not translating those. Jerome hired secretaries, and by the year 405, he completed the translation of the entire Bible into Latin. That whole Bible that Becky can hold up there, that's about how many hundreds of pages? Shoot. He died 15 years later. He wrote some 63 more books that we have from Jerome. Jerome's translations won enthusiastic support from his followers and fervent oppositions from scholars. Isn't that how human beings are? If you like a person, you're like, oh, that's such a great translation. Those who didn't like him were like nitpicking his translations. By the mid-6th century, Cassiodorus prepared what he called the Codex Grandior from Jerome's translation. So he took all of Jerome's translations, copied them into another book, which served as the basis for the Codex Amiantinus, which I don't expect you've ever heard, but maybe the word that you might have heard is the Vulgate. What is the Vulgate? The Vulgate then is this edition that brought together Jerome's translations into a single book, essentially what we call the Bible today. We have this first Latin Bible. Today we know it as the Vulgate. It's a fancy way of saying it's taking Jerome's translations and pulling them together into this codex, into this book. And that codex was used by Gregory I of Rome. Pope Gregory, often call him Pope Gregory the Great. So suddenly the Vulgate, Jerome's translations, were being used by the Pope. Would you recognize Jerome if you saw him on a stained glass window or in a painting? How would you recognize Jerome?
Does he have a book?
A book would be a good guess if it's a person with a book and or holding a pen doing some sort of writing. Jerome, because he lived in a cave, a very austere life, dressed in sackcloth, burlap, is often pictured like a penitent, almost like a John the Baptist sort of creature wearing sackcloth in the middle of the wilderness or in a cave. He's often depicted with a lion, because according to one story, a lion came to him with a thorn in its paw, and he removed the thorn from the lion's paw. Imagine that a lion comes to you, and you're brave enough to get close to that lion. Obviously, he was such a man of God, so holy, that he could get so close to that lion and take that thorn out of his paw. So St. Jerome also often pictured with a lion. And finally, a red cardinal's hat. He wasn't a cardinal, but he was close to those popes. Pope Gregory the Great used his translation. Pope Damasus commissioned his translation. He was close to the Pope, so you often see a big red hat beside him somewhere. Or even him wearing a hat in some instances.
I think that lion's thorn on that lion's paw was something that was lost in translation, maybe.
It was a good story.
Yeah.
It was a great story around the campfire. I loved telling that story to my grandkids. Let me tell you the story of Jerome and the lion. Right? He was such a holy man of God. So kids, be holy like Jerome was holy. And not even the lions will harm you. Are we ready for Ulfilas? Ulfilas. U-L-F-I-L-A-S. Ulfilas. In the 4th century from 311 to 383. Ulfilas, I don't imagine we've heard of him before. He was named the bishop to the Visigoths, So here we are in Rome, which is in current-day Italy, on the boot. The Visigoths, or the barbarians that lived to the north, and who eventually came and sacked Rome in 410, but he was the one who decided, I am going to go see if I can be friends with them and preach to them the gospel. So, Ulfilas was named bishop to the Visigoths, developed a Gothic alphabet made of Greek letters, and then he translated his Bible, the Latin Bible, into Gothic so that those people could read the Bible in their own language. These are people who didn't have a writing system before. They talked with one another. They had an oral language. He said, okay, I'm going to try to figure out what letters to use to capture their sound. Could you say that word again? I'm going to try to create some sounds. We're going to create an alphabet. He created the alphabet, and then he used that alphabet to translate our Bible for the Visigoths. Talk about fun, huh? And he was challenged because how do you start saying certain words like Holy Spirit in a new language that you're creating with its own alphabet? How do you express thoughts like that? He obviously had some challenges to come up with the words for ideas like that. He translated the whole Bible except for Samuel and Kings. And we know there are 2 books of Samuel and 2 books of Kings in the Bible. He translated the whole Bible for the Visigoths except for those 4 books. Why not those 4 books? Because those 4 books talk about wars. And what did the Visigoths end up doing? Coming down and sacking Rome, taking over Rome, capturing Rome. The challenge was that the Visigoths and their followers, who later went to the Iberian Peninsula to Spain, the Goths ended up in Spain, and because they were starting to spread a certain type of Christianity, which today we know of as Arian Christianity, based on this thought that Jesus was begotten in time and therefore is not eternal. The question is, did God make Jesus? The Arians said yes. Others in Rome said no. Jesus existed from the beginning of time. God did not make Jesus. Jesus is eternal. Arians said no. Jesus was a human being like us. God created Jesus. Ooh, that was a big fight. But because it was the argument that it was, we ended up destroying a lot of the books of the Arians, including all of those Visigoth Bibles that Ulfilas and others had translated and copied. But it's a great story for us of essentially the first time that a Bible was translated into another language. Outside of these languages that they were written in, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, we have those languages. Then we translated into Latin. Ulfilas translated into another language, even though not very many of those copies survive today. It's an early example of him translating the Bible for another people. It's important for us because eventually we're going to translate the Bible into English. So it's sort of like setting the stage for how did we get the English Bible? You ever thought about that? How did we go from Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic to an English Bible? It didn't come very straight. Other early translations were on the top of page 9, included a translation in Syriac, which used an Aramaic dialects. That was in about 170. 5 dialects of Coptic. Coptic was the language of Egypt from the 3rd century to 11th century. So we started to translate the Bible for the Egyptians. It's hard to see in our map here, but essentially this is Italy here, this comes along. So down here is Egypt. We translated the Bible into Coptic. And in Egypt there were 5 different dialects, so we essentially had to come up with 5 different Bibles for those 5 different language groups. The Ethiopians here in Africa had their translations since the 4th century. They included books that we didn't have in our Bible, books like Enoch, which should be spelled with an H, Jubilees, and the 3rd book of Baruch. And then the Armenians had translations since the 400s as well. So now that we've agreed on what books are in our Bible in the 4th century, now people are taking those books of the Bible and starting to translate them into their languages. 4th century. Are we up to translating them into English yet? 1,000 more years. Number 6, the next step in the transition is vernacular Bibles. What does it mean to have a vernacular Bible? The vernacular is a person's language. So I'm going to translate the Bible into your language. You speak Spanish? Great. I'm going to translate the Bible into the vernacular, into Spanish that you speak. Huh. You speak French? Yikes, I don't know a lot of French, but we're going to figure out how we can translate this Bible into French for you, into your vernacular so you can understand it. So here we go. Letter A, after Jerome had completed the Vulgate Bible in Latin in the early 5th century, in the 400s, Latin became the literary language of Europe. So Latin was the language. A lot of people learn Latin today. A lot of things written in Latin back then. By the late 12th century, which means the late 1100s, there were various religious communities in France, like the Waldensians, and in Germany and the Low Countries, that's like Netherlands and Belgium, Luxembourg, those countries up there. Different religious groups like the Beggards and the Beguines, who wanted to return to apostolic simplicity, and so they pointed out that there are different interpretations in the Bible. So what do we do about this? Different people are interpreting the Bible in different ways. Well, maybe it would help if we had a Bible in our own language. So it was an intense period of translating the Bible into the vernacular, into the languages that people understood. At the same time as that, Innocent in Rome, Pope Innocent III, condemned heretical interpretations of scriptures in 1199. So what happens when there are different groups like the Waldensians, the Beggards, and the Beguines who are beginning to interpret the scripture in certain ways? The Pope is suddenly saying, oh, wait a minute, you can read the Bible, but if you misinterpret it, I will burn you at the stake. I'll torture you, I'll imprison you. I'll make you take back what you said about the Bible. My way of seeing the Bible is going to be the way we see the Bible. The Council of Toulouse, which is in France, met in 1229 to discuss the heretical Albigensians, and they forbade laity to have their own Bibles in any language. So think about this for a moment. Why do Catholics not know their Bibles? It traces back to 1229 when laity were forbidden from having Bibles. Becky, give me your Bible. You cannot have that. Get here. No lay person could have a Bible in the church. I could not make this up. This is part of our checkered history as a church, if you will. At the same time that the Pope is saying, you can't have Bibles in your own language, give me your Bible, King Louis XIV, who we've heard of in France, the Sun King, St. Louis, Missouri is named after him. King Louis XIV in France decided to commission his own translation of the Bible into French. So at the same time that the Pope is saying, thou shalt not have thy own translation of the scriptures, King Louis XIV is translating his own scriptures into French. At the same time, over in Spain, the Jews were translating their Hebrew scriptures into Spanish. Letter E, that's a concurrent thing. James I of Aragon banned vernacular translations of scripture in 1233. We know that Spain has always been very faithful to Rome. Think of the Inquisitions in Spain, right? In Aragon, but then again, going back to this tie to Rome of forbidding translations. Becky, give me your Bible. Thanks. Letter F, Italian translations arose by the mid-13th century, so by the middle of the 1200s, shortly after St. Francis of Assisi. 1369 was an imperial edict. The Holy Roman Emperor forbade the translation of the Bible to German. The Pope reinforced that in 1375. Thou shalt not translate the Bible into German. We are having problems with the Germans. We do not want to give them the Bible in their language. Well, Father Jamie, you are making this up. Somebody's making this up. I wish I were making this up. Okay, finally we get to the saga of translating into English. Now that we've talked about Spanish and French, and now the fight with getting it into German. What about English? Because the people over on the English Isles, on the islands, Great Britain, what is Great Britain today, they speak English. They want a Bible in English. Number 7, the Bible in English. Oxford biblical scholar and preacher John Wycliffe, remember that name, he scorned the corruption and the schism of the church. He looked at the church and he just said, this church is just not what Jesus imagined the church should be. It's divided, it's corrupt, and it is taking the Bible out of Becky's hands when the Bible is for salvation. How is Becky going to be saved if we don't give her the Bible for her to read? The Pope is saying, take the Bible away from Becky. John Wycliffe was saying, give Becky a Bible. If the Bible is a means to salvation, Becky's salvation depends on her having a Bible in her hand that she can read and understand. Don't take it away from her. I have a feeling this is not going to sit well with the church. The church, said John Wycliffe, should have no wealth or power or hierarchy. When Wycliffe looked at the church with its hierarchy, with its power, with its wealth, with its papal states, John Wycliffe was just like, Jesus would come back to the earth and he would not recognize this church. This is not the church that Jesus imagined.
So, Wycliffe was a rebel before Luther? Martin?
Wycliffe was a rebel before Luther. Luther was going to come 200 years later, 1517.
He started the
Wycliffe was an early prophet, we might say. How can Becky be saved? If you say the Bible tells us how to be saved, then give her a Bible, for God's sake. Why are you taking it away from her? So, needless to say, Wycliffe was condemned and forced to flee Oxford, where he taught. His followers came to be known as the Lollards, which I think is this fascinating word, the Lollards. The Lollard might be translated the mutterers, people who mutter. Muttered, where did that come from? Because any of us remember the Latin Mass, when the priest used to turn his back to us and say those words of consecration. It sounded like he was muttering. It sounded like he was muttering. So the mutters, or the Lollards, were his followers. They believed that Christ was symbolically present in the Eucharist. They opposed hierarchy and the wealth that bishops had. And they pushed for English prayers, and more importantly, the Lollards, Wycliffe's followers, pushed for an English Bible. You must let us have an English Bible. We demand an English Bible. 1380s, the first English Bible was published by the Lollards. 1408, the Oxford Council forbade scriptural translations to English. Imagine that. The bishops meet in Oxford and declare, we forbid all translations of the Bible to English. They also forbade ownership of Bibles without diocesan authority. Okay, if Becky wants a Bible, Becky can ask the bishop, and the bishop will give Becky permission if the bishop wants Becky to have a Bible. This is the 1400s. As Catholics, we have such a mixed history with the Bible. You follow me? We have tried for so many years to take the Bible out of people's hands that it's no wonder. We need to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, why don't people know the Bible? Why don't Catholics know the Bible any better? Hello? For centuries, we've deprived people of God's Word. Not only did the Oxford Council do that, but they also ordered that all English Bibles be burned. Okay? Let's go and round up all the English Bibles and let's burn them. Thou shalt not have an English Bible. Mario, if you have an English Bible, I want it. Ready? Hand it over. Gloria? Are you hiding something? You see the tension that this is setting up? 1454. Nearly 50 years later, over 50 years later, was an incredible invention, because once we invented the printing press, what's going to happen? Before, we were copying Bibles, and that took a lot of work, people. I'm just telling you. Becky, how many months now have you spent, Becky, trying to copy that one Bible? It's like taking forever. I mean, you think any needlework project, it takes a long time? It does. Needlework takes a long time. Try copying a Bible. And that's what we were doing back then. It was copy the Bible by hand, and so when someone burnt your Bible, it was like, dude, do you know how long I spent on that Bible? Once we had the printing press, we no longer had to be sitting there writing and copying our own Bibles. We could just start printing them out. And what's going to happen once you can start printing out English Bibles? You're going to be able to stop the flow of Bibles now?
But before that, they used to have a feather, right?
We used to have all sorts of writing instruments, some sort of quill, some sort of pointy thing that you can dip into something and write with, and that's what Becky used. I don't know how many candles she burned at night just to copy her Bible. She wanted her own Bible. She copied her own Bible, and the bishop comes in and says, "Give me your Bible." Ready for Father William Tyndall? I put Father in front of his name because he's a Catholic priest, right? So instead of thinking of him as William Tyndall, he was Father Bill to his people, I'm imagining. So Father Bill said, for the sake of salvation, Scripture must be available to everyone. Give Becky her Bible back. His request of the church to translate Scripture to English was denied. Father Bill was denied. Here, Father Bill, a good and holy priest, advocating that people be able to read the Bible, and the church is saying, no, Father Bill, shut up, go home. He went to Europe, where he and his assistant finished translating the New Testament into English in 1525. How interesting that he went into the Low Countries and into Germany to be able to do his project, because it was forbidden in England. It was illegal to translate a Bible to English in England. He had to go to Germany to finish his project. He got his project finished. Now that we have a printing press, praise the Lord, let's print this thing. The authorities in Cologne rush in to say, oh, we understand you're trying to print an English Bible, which is illegal over in England. They tried to interrupt the publication. Father Bill fled with his work. He sent several copies to London, and of course, English Bibles are forbidden. What happened to the Bibles? They were burned. But fortunately, we had the printing press now after 1454, so we're going to send him another shipment. Page 10, Father Bill Tyndall fled to Antwerp. Where's Antwerp located? Netherlands. Ooh, are we making any connections? The Old Catholic Church, Netherlands, religious tolerance. Oh, this is interesting. And Father Bill began to translate the Old Testament. Okay, he translated the New Testament. Now he's going to translate the Old Testament into English. Unfortunately, someone said, hey, can you come outside for a moment? They lured him outside. And what happened to him? He was condemned for heresy, strangled and burned at the stake. There are various pictures that survive of him being tied to the stake and showing them strangling him and then burning his body.
That's cruel.
What was his crime?
Bible.
Translating the Bible to English. Giving Janie a translation of the Bible that she could read. Janie, do you read Latin? No. I'm going to give you an English Bible. Deal? We recognize that Father Bill lost his life. Tyndall lost his life because he translated the Bible to English.
Oh.
His dying words before he was strangled were, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. What he didn't know was that he had left. He had already gone to Antwerp and was in the Netherlands.
So who strangled and burned him?
We imagine church authorities. I mean, it was forbidden by the church.
Well,
The church has done all sorts of terrible, terrible things in the name of religion. I don't want to say it's in the name of love or mercy or anything like that. I mean, we know that the church, like any organization, often centers around things like power and wealth. When you have incredible power and wealth,
Make it disappear.
You have a big responsibility. He said, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. What he didn't know was that the King of England had already started his own English translation of the Bible, which was completed the year before Father Bill died. That became known as the Coverdale Bible. And then after that, especially with the printing press, we start seeing all sorts of English Bibles start to arrive. Matthew's Bible, which was largely Tyndale's translations, printed in Antwerp. We saw the Bible of the Geneva exiles, made famous because that's what Shakespeare used when Shakespeare quoted the Bible. The Bishop's Bible, which was approved by the Church in Canterbury. The Dewey Bible. Who, have you heard of that Bible before? Where's that Bible? That was the official English Bible approved by the Council of Trent in the 1500s. And then finally, the translation of the Bible that we've all heard of, the King James Version. The King James Version. Have you heard of the King James Version before? If you pray saying, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, that's the King James Bible. That comes to us from 1611. That translation. It sounds a little funny. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Do you speak like that today? No, that's how they spoke in 1611. And we've used that same translation in English in most churches ever since. A lot of people are beginning to change the translation to something more modern. Instead of Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, what do we say? Father in heaven, Heavenly Father, holy is your name. Oh, that's what that means. Thy kingdom come. May your kingdom come to this earth. Thy will be done. May your will be done. May we do your will. But the translation that we use comes to us from 1611, King James Version. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That was the fruit of rigorous scholarship and elegant language. And then at the bottom of page 10, I put all those different versions that led up to the King James Version, just to give us an idea that, the Bible that Becky holds in her hand didn't become the Bible overnight. It started with all these different people writing all these different books, and then someone deciding which bucket do they go into. Can we agree on this is a good thing or not? Do we throw it out? Do we debate it? And eventually a person like Athanasius comes up with a list. Other people start approving that list. We start translating them, and finally we start getting them into English. Which brings us to the final question of the night. Which English translation is the best? Which English translation is the best? I think my answer is, it depends. There are so many translations out there that every person has to essentially determine, what type of translation do you like? Do you like a sort of King James 1611 translation of the Bible? Great, use it then. Do you like something more modern, something that you can understand a little more easily? Some are more formal, like what we hear at Mass, more formal. Other, for instance, things like kids' Bibles, teen study Bibles, etc., are translated in a way that makes it more understandable. Instead of saying Jesus' disciples, they might say Jesus' friends. Oh, kind of like that translation. And it's where you start going online and start taking a look at different translations side by side and start seeing how are they different, and try to figure out, if I had to decide between those 4 different translations, which one would I pick? Which one sounds better for me? Which one do I like better? Would I rather say, this then is how you should pray, or pray then in this way, or you should pray like this, or this is how you are to pray? 4 different ways of translating the same sentence. Which one do you like better? But you don't have to limit it to these 4. Let's say these are just 4 examples. When you go online, Bible Gateway, Bible Hub, there are all sorts of Bible programs online where you can look at different translations and start comparing them and saying, ooh, I kind of like this translation. I grew up many years ago with a translation at that time that they called the Good News translation. It was like so easy to understand, like in simple language. It's sort of like my default is to an easier translation. Yeah, we'll read the formal things during Mass, but outside of Mass, there's just something beautiful about a Bible that's written in words that
It had more meaning.
But if you go to a hotel or a motel, it's always the same Bible.
King James
Most of the
Bible.
time,
King
most
James
of the
Version.
time, people promote.
Yeah. Which is great, it's one translation of the Bible. Is it better than others? Not necessarily, especially because it's 400 years old and it's a type of English that we don't use anymore. When's the last time that you said, "How art thou today?" Thou art lovely.
Why, thank
We
thee.
just don't speak like that anymore.
Very British.
That was too
Any last comments? So essentially the trajectory we're going in these 2 weeks is we're seeing how it was that these Christian scriptures were written, when and by whom, and then who started pulling together into this list that made the Bible. Next week then, let's go backwards a little and start figuring out, okay, well, we talked about the Christian scriptures, the New Testament. What was the process of the whole Hebrew scriptures? Because that's a lot of books written by a lot of authors over a long time span. Are there any issues that are going to come up with any of those books?
Hmm.
You did a great job today, explaining the process.
Any last comments?
I like the way you wrote this. the
Thank you,
books
Bob.
and all that.
Yes.
So what is the best translation of the Bible? Depends.
Your
What do you
preference.
like?
Whatever your preference.
What do you like?
That concluded the prayer. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
All who joined us on Facebook, y'all are incredible. Thanks for joining this evening. Have a good night.
Is the Bible still